In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Christ is risen.
Indeed he is risen.
Christos voskrese. Christos anesti.
Christos anesti.
Today we celebrate the memory of Saint Alexis Toth, Saint Alexis of Wilkes-Barre. Now, if any of you have ever traveled to Wilkes-Barre, it ain't much to brag about. And so when you hear a saint is Saint Alexis of Wilkes-Barre, you're kind of like, oh, he must not be a very good saint. He's from Wilkes-Barre. I'm not trashing Wilkes-Barre. I quite like Wilkes-Barre. It's in the beautiful Wyoming Valley in Pennsylvania. And while in seminary, I attended St. Tikhon's, as most of you probably know. And within the monastery church at St. Tikhon's is the earthly remains, the relics, the entire relics of Saint Alexis. You can even see one of the, what I think is probably a finger bone. There's a large icon over the tomb, and inset into it, into mastic with glass over it, is a bone of his. When they exhumed his relics after 50 years in the tomb, there's a tomb right outside, right behind the apse of the monastery church, the Catholicon of the monastery. There's a beautiful marble tomb that he was interred in when he reposed. And I think that the intention was that they were going to exhume him, as they do often for saints. They were going to exhume him after 100 years, but for some reason they did it at 50 years. Not sure why. I think it was 1994, thereabouts. And they found that his body was incorrupt, which is often the case when a saint is uncovered. They found that his body was incorrupt, save for, I think, maybe one part of a hand, because that was submerged in water. The tomb had leaked. And of course they brought him into, and revested him, buried him, and entombed him in the church where he is to this day. Now, it was no small thing to enter into the monastery Catholicon, the main church of the monastery. To walk in there is very beautiful. Many of you, or some of you, have already been there. I know Karen's been there. Several other people I think have. Linda's been there. I know Matushka and many of the children have been there. It is a beautiful place to be. And you're surrounded by holiness the moment you enter. The moment you enter the grounds, really. Because it is a place where saints have walked. There's a room off to the right inside the church that houses a whole bunch of relics of the saints, notably the American saints, and also the relics of Saint Tikhon of Zadonsk, who did not come to America, but after whom the monastery is named. He is the patron of the monastery. And these are all very fancy reliquaries, yay big, made of polished brass and whatnot. And then you have Saint Tikhon. His relics are quite a bit older, and it's a very modest silver reliquary. And it's no small thing to be able to enter into this beautiful place where saints have walked. To be able to venerate their very relics, parts of their bones and flesh even in some cases. You can kiss them. You participate in holiness by venerating these icons of Christ. Interestingly, every single time I would go to venerate St. Tikhon's relics, St. Tikhon of Zadonsk, they would be warm to the touch, as if the body was still alive. I mean, it was under glass. It was quite old. The reliquary had been set for quite a long time, quite a lot longer than a lot of the other saints in there. Every single time, and I thought it was just me being creative or whatnot. But I would go in there every single time. For 3 years, we would be in there every day. And every single day, the relics were warm to the touch of St. Tikhon's. Very, very cool. That's just a story to tell you. That's just wanted to not leave that detail out. But then you would go up to the kleros, to the two sides where the choirs would be. And right there is where Saint Alexis is entombed. And you could venerate his hand. And the reason this was so important, to me anyway, and I think to many people, is the impact that he had had in the United States on the Orthodox Church. People say often, and I often repeat this, that St. John of Shanghai in San Francisco is perhaps the most important of the American saints, the pinch hitter on the American team. I know I'm not allowed to make sports references because I don't understand sports, but I know what pinch hitter means. St. John, and he is, I would say, but no less so Saint Alexis. Saint Alexis was a married priest in the Byzantine Rite of the Roman Church. And he came to America because the people had requested a priest to serve them. And he came and presented himself in St. Louis to the bishop, who, among many other bishops of his day, had no kind words or sentiments towards the Catholics of the Eastern rites, the Eastern European married clergy and their strange ways, their Greek-looking ways. Yet they had no patience, they had no intention of inviting them to be among them in America, in the Catholic thing. And when he presented himself to the man's name was Bishop Ireland, he was actually quite Irish. And he more or less looked upon St. Alexis with derision. He despised him, and he commanded him not to celebrate any of the divine services in his diocese. He was not given faculties here in America to serve the Mass in any rite. He had a whole congregation of people who were depending on him to serve them, and he was not given the blessing to serve here. He couldn't support himself doing priestly things as he had intended, so he took menial jobs. He was a baker. At some point his wife and child, or children, I can't remember how many he had, died. And he was a single man. After several years, without being able to provide for his people, he had the idea, you know, several centuries ago, before the Unia, in the 1500s, of the Unia of Brest-Litovsk, which saw the creation of this false wing of the Roman Church. Basically, it was, to put it very quickly, it was the wheeling and dealing of the Polish and Lithuanian princes. And they traded like cattle a large swath of the Subcarpathian people and said, fine, you have these people. And they said, fine, you can be Orthodox, just commemorate the Pope. And that was how the Byzantine Catholics were born. And this is where you get Ukrainian Catholics and all these Ruthenians and whatnot, and Melkites. This was, there were several unions, but in any case, this is where this was born. It was an inauthentic grouping of people in the villages who scarcely understood one thing from the other, that they weren't Orthodox any longer. And you leave something alone for a few hundred years, and it becomes entrenched and baptized. And there you have the Byzantine Rite of the Catholic Church, to which he was born into and belonged and was ordained in. And he says, centuries ago we were Orthodox Christians. There is a thriving Orthodox Church here in America. I will present myself to the Orthodox bishop. I think it was the bishop in San Francisco. And I will have audience with him. And I will ask him to receive us. And receive them they did. Saint Alexis was responsible for bringing thousands of souls into the church. Parishes all over the United States that were Byzantine Rite came in droves when Saint Alexis came into Orthodoxy. The parish that I served after my ordination for 4 or 5 years, St. John the Baptist in Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, a parish that Karen's uncle also served. And so her cousin, Father Jason, and I always exchanged memories of Nanticoke's rectory before I burned it down. It's rebuilt. I promise. Thank you, Church Mutuals. St. John the Baptist Orthodox Church began as a Byzantine Catholic church in 1911. And a man called Giddo Wanchishin, Giddo wasn't his given name, Giddo means granddaddy. Giddo Wanchishin, who is Seamus's godmother's grandfather. It's not that hard to trace, but he and 4 or 5 other fellows heard about this man preaching in Wilkes-Barre to the people. And Nanticoke is very close to Wilkes-Barre, about a 10-minute drive. They took themselves into the city to hear this man preach. And they returned to Nanticoke and brought to the people, they said, listen to what this man preaches. We are going into the Orthodox Church. We are returning to the faith of our ancestors. So when I came and learned that that parish had been a direct result of Saint Alexis, the saint that I greeted on a daily basis, who I asked to pray for me on a daily basis, whenever there was trouble or just some sort of wrinkle in the fabric of my time in seminary, I would go and bring my prayers to Saint Alexis and say, please pray for me, knowing what an important man he was and a humble man. When I got to this parish and learned that he had turned that parish back toward the authentic faith of their fathers, I rejoiced, because Saint Alexis was with us. Saint Alexis was interceding for us. Every time I celebrated the Divine Liturgy at that altar, I was doing it because of Saint Alexis. I was there because of Saint Alexis. He too is one of the major players on the American team. I think very often many of the other saints in the American, I keep calling it the American team, many other players on the American team are remembered more readily sometimes than Saint Alexis. But I think we really need to turn our attention towards the effect that he had in the church in America. We call him the confessor and defender of orthodoxy in America. He confessed and defended it by himself embracing it, or re-embracing it on behalf of his forefathers. Countless parishes that exist today exist because of him. He is one of the he's a major part of the backbone of the church in America. We owe so much to his intercession. He was very humble. He was widowed. And towards the end of his life, the church needed a bishop. And he saw the writing on the wall. And then he thanked God that he was too darn sick to accept. He celebrated the fact that he was too sick to be able to accept being made a bishop. So he was not made a bishop. But they wanted it badly. The people wanted it. The Holy Synod wanted it. But Saint Alexis said no in humility, and very shortly after he reposed. He was a tall, broad, robust man. Combine Gunner and Vance, that would be like the size of Saint Alexis. Just big, tall, robust Slav. Absolutely a bear of a man. If you look at pictures of him, he towers over the other priests. It's kind of funny. And they took this big bear of a man who was very little in his humility, who led droves of people into the church by his example, by his preaching, by his witness. He was a holy man. And of course his relics were incorrupt. I have numerous relics here in the church that I put out from time to time. I do not yet have a relic of Saint Alexis. That is next on my agenda to press Father John up in Pennsylvania to give me a relic of Saint Alexis so that we will have it here at St. Andrews for venerating and for emulating. I encourage you to look him up, Google him. See pictures and videos. You can look it up on YouTube. There's even videos of his glorification ceremonies and the liturgy when he was glorified in 1994. It's grainy as heck, but it's worth watching. And it's momentous. When we venerate the relics of saints, we participate in their holiness. We embrace what they freely gave. and hear their words and accept their message, because their message is Christ. Their very being is Christ. This is what this man did. By being Christ, by putting on Christ, by being his very image, many souls were turned to God. Saint Seraphim of Sarov said, acquire a spirit of humility and thousands around you will be saved. He's right. Saint Alexis isn't any different from you or from me. Saint Alexis did exactly what the Lord asked of him. The Lord asks a lot of us. He asks us to be humble. He asks us to live lives that are pleasing to him. By the way we exist, he asks us to witness to the message of the gospel. Like Saint Alexis, like so many of the saints, like all the saints, like especially the North American saints who are so dear to us. Look him up, learn his story. Ask for his intercessions, so that you may lead a life that is well pleasing to God. So that your life will be one that is emulated. So that one day your relics will be venerated. So that as part of the kingdom, the eternal kingdom, you are remembered in the divine council. Saint Alexis, pray to God for us. Christ is risen.